Okay. So yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be here to talk to you about barn swallows. I'll give an overview about kind of what makes these birds special. And I'll talk about some of the barn swallow research that we've been doing at Arasha and in the Little Campbell Watershed where we're based. And I'll also mention some ways that you can be a good barn swallow host if you have barn swallows on your property, and how you can do your part to protect them even if you don't. So, but first I just wanted to introduce Arasha, since many of you may not have heard of us. And it will help to give some context to our barn swallow work and where it's happening, the place where it's happening. So Arasha is an international faith-based conservation organization, and we have 3 locations within Canada. Our BC location is at Brookesdale Environmental Centre in South Surrey. We've been based there since 2001, and at Brookesdale we have 3 main program areas. So these are conservation science, environmental education, and sustainable agriculture. And we also host retreats and workshops and run a residential internship program. And we take a watershed approach to conservation. So pretty much all of our work is focused within the Little Campbell River watershed, which stretches 30 kilometers from the headwaters in South Langley to where it empties into Boundary Bay on Semiahmoo First Nations land, just north of the border. So this watershed is largely rural, although it's developing very quickly. And our goal is to see thriving ecosystems and communities within this watershed. And basically we work towards this goal by getting to know our place through monitoring species and their habitats. And then we let this monitoring work inform further research and conservation action. And in our conservation work, we prioritize species at risk. Although there are many in the watershed, I've just put up a few photos here of some of the priority species that we're working on right now. So you can see red-legged frog, western toad, Oregon forest snail, painted turtle, Salish sucker, and of course, barn swallows. You may notice that most of these species are fairly movement limited, so it does make sense to study them at a watershed scale. But barn swallows, however, are not. In fact, they are long distance migrants. So the things that affect them are really broad scale, and they're certainly not limited to a watershed. But still, there are things that we can do at a watershed scale to protect them, and there are certainly things that are affecting them at a watershed scale. So here in BC's Lower Mainland, we have 5 species of swallow: barn, cliff, tree, violet green, and northern rough-winged swallows. A lot of people tend to confuse barn swallows with cliff swallows, and that's primarily because of their nesting habits. Barn swallows build cup-shaped nests out of mud, whereas cliff swallows also build nests out of mud, but they're totally enclosed except for a small opening. And cliff swallows also tend to nest in much larger colonies than barn swallows, but they will nest on barns, hence the confusion. Tree and violet green swallows are cavity nesters, so they will use nest boxes or holes in trees. And northern rough-winged swallows are often, they will nest in dirt banks or burrows. In many ways, barn swallows are the easiest swallow to identify. They are the only species with a long forked tail and orange undersides. They have an iridescent blue back and head, and then they have white spots on their tail that can be seen during flight. The males tend to be more boldly colored and have longer tails than the females. And they're just incredible acrobats. They'll fly over open fields foraging for insects, catching insects out of midair. Sometimes you'll see them foraging quite low near the ground. It kind of depends on the time of day and the availability of insects. They can also forage pretty high, but sometimes you'll see them skimming just over the top of the grass. So like I said before, their nests are cup-shaped. They're made out of mud. They're usually lined with dried grass and feathers. And they'll also use horsehair to line nests sometimes. And actually I've witnessed chicks getting entangled in long strands of horsehair. So that can actually be a bit of a danger to them.
Yikes.
They usually nest inside buildings. They prefer to be in dark enclosed spaces, so like barns and sheds. But sometimes they do nest on the outside of houses, like I think some of you have witnessed, or sometimes they'll nest under bridges or in culverts. And their nests are typically attached to a horizontal beam, but sometimes it'll just be attached to a vertical surface like a wall. It's kind of amazing what they can attach their nests to. I often see them nesting on wires, and they seem to be especially fond of light fixtures, which can be problematic. Usually they will raise 2 broods per season, sometimes even 3, but usually that's only if 1 brood fails. And their incubation time is about 2 weeks, and then the chicks are in the nest for about 3 weeks before they fledge. Both parents will feed the young. They also clean out the nest. You can watch parents bring food to the nest and then leave with droppings, which they will then drop over a field to leave the nest nice and clean. And then once the fledglings are out of the nest and flying, they'll usually hang around the nest for quite a while, and they will still continue to use it at night, still being fed by the parents. And the fledglings, you can see in this photo on the right, are pretty scruffy in appearance. They have bright yellow bills and paler underbellies, shorter tails compared to adults. Barn swallows are actually the most widely distributed swallow in the world. They're found on all continents except for Antarctica. So many find it surprising that they're listed as threatened in Canada because they are so widespread. Here you can see their summer range in yellow and their winter range in blue. There's 14 different subspecies of barn swallow. In North America, we have Hirundo rustica erythrogaster. Erythrogaster means red belly. The European subspecies have whiter bellies. And they migrate from North America to Central and South America. Studies have found that barn swallows on the West Coast usually don't go farther than Panama, so they just go to Central America. But those on the East Coast go all the way down into South America. I think this quote really captures the essence of the barn swallow. This is by William Dawson, who wrote The Birds of California in 1923. So I'll just read this. "One hardly knows what quality to admire most in the barn swallow. All the dear associations of life at the old farm come thronging up at sight of him. You think of him somehow as part of the sacred past, yet here he is today, as young and as fresh as ever, bubbling over with springtime laughter." And a question that often comes up is, where did barn swallows nest before there were barns? And the answer to that is mostly in caves. They like dark places that are enclosed. But today they've almost completely converted to nesting in human structures, such as barns, sheds, houses, bridges, culverts. And there are hardly ever reports of barn swallows nesting on natural substrates. There are some other swallows that have made this switch as well, such as purple martins and cliff swallows. So because of this, barn swallow numbers are probably higher and their range is more widespread than in pre-settlement times. And barn swallows and people are very culturally intertwined. For instance, in Europe and Asia, barn swallows have been associated with humans and their structures for more than 2,000 years. And there's a lot of ancient stories and legends involving barn swallows. In many parts of the world, having barn swallows nesting on one's property is considered a sign of good fortune or a harbinger of spring. There's even legends about barn swallows visiting Christ on the cross or stealing fire from wrathful deities. So all kinds of stories going back to ancient times. However, despite their huge range, barn swallows are steeply declining here in Canada. Since the mid-80s, they've declined by 80% in Canada and 87% in British Columbia. And in 2017, they were federally listed as threatened under the Species at Risk Act. But why? What's causing this decline? The reasons are not entirely clear. It's very hard to tease apart causes because of their huge range and geographic differences. such as between breeding and wintering grounds. But there do seem to be three primary drivers. And the first is habitat loss. So we know for sure that barn swallows are losing habitat at a really rapid rate. This is the Campbell Heights development in South Surrey. And we know that old farm buildings that they rely on for nesting are being torn down, and the open fields that they use for foraging are being developed and replaced with houses and industry. So habitat decline is definitely a factor. But barn swallow declines are actually part of a larger trend of aerial insectivore declines worldwide. Aerial insectivores are birds that feed on flying insects. They include nighthawks, swifts, swallows, and flycatchers, among others. And it's curious that all these birds are declining as a group, and yet they all have somewhat different habitat requirements. But the common thread among all of them is their dependence on flying insects for food. So it's likely that we're seeing the impacts of a global loss of insects. Flying insects are sometimes referred to as aerial plankton because of the critical food source that they provide for many wildlife species. So there's a whole airborne ocean of flying insects above us that we can't see and rarely even consider, except maybe when we get a mosquito bite. And different birds will exploit different levels of this ocean. Some will fly high to catch the upper levels, and some will skim low over the ground to catch the lower insects. So what's happening to this ocean of insects? Many are declining because they have an aquatic stage that's sensitive to changes in water quality. So pollution can kill off the larval stage of these insects. And then climate variation can also affect seasonal timing of insect availability, and then that can negatively affect their avian predators. And then, of course, pesticides are the well-known culprit of insect die-offs, and they affect pollination as well as aerial insectivores. Another factor might be climate change on the breeding grounds. There are more storms and cold snaps occurring, which are likely having negative impacts on barn swallows at many stages in their life cycle, but particularly at the nestling stage. We know a lot less about how a habitat change and climate change on their wintering grounds is affecting them. And that's actually where they spend more than half of their time. So it's definitely something that more study needs to be devoted to. Another factor that we know is affecting barn swallows is competition and predation by non-native species, such as house sparrows and starlings. They will peck the eggs and the nestlings and shove them out of the nest, often for seemingly no reason. And larger species such as crows will actually eat the eggs and the chicks. And these species are all increasing and coinciding with barn swallow declines. So at Arasha, we started monitoring barn swallow nest success in 2014. The program was designed to get a better sense for how the species is doing within the Little Campbell River watershed. At the time, they were listed by COSEWIC, but not by SARA. We began by just identifying 10 sites where we knew there were barn swallow nests. One of the sites was at Arasha. We have 2 barns that house nesting barn swallows. We also found nests at several sites within Campbell Valley Park and at the Semiahmoo Fish and Game Club, and several nests are also on private farms. So to monitor nests when they're fairly low, we use an extendable mirror that's attached to a pole. These can be purchased pretty cheaply from auto supply stores. The mirror has a light and it allows us to see inside the nests. We taped our mirror to a piece of wood to make it a little bit longer so that we could reach some of those higher nests.
Like a selfie stick.
Yeah, exactly. And it works pretty well for those nests that are lower down. But a lot of the nests are actually quite high. And for the higher nests, we have a longer extendable pole with a camera attached to the end of it. And that sends an image to a receiver that you can hold down at the ground and see images of what's inside the nest. This is actually an older setup. We now have a newer camera and a much lighter pole which can take photos and videos. So that has made it a lot easier. This was a very hefty pole that we had to lug around. And so we visit the nests once a week and count the number of eggs and chicks. And then we estimate laying, hatching, and fledging dates and calculate nest success as the proportion of eggs that successfully become fledglings. And we try to minimize disturbance as much as possible. Once the chicks become old enough, we don't put the mirror or the camera into the nest because we don't want them to prematurely fledge. So here you can see a photo on top of some older chicks that are close to fledging, some eggs. And then when the chicks are first hatched, they are just little pink blobs. They're blind and no feathers. So, and they're actually quite hard to count when they're at that stage. Actually, this picture still has one egg in it that hasn't hatched yet. So here you can see a graph of the number of buildings with active barn swallow nests that were surveyed each year. And then on the number on the top of each bar is the total number of active nests that were surveyed. So ranged from 2015, I should say, was an anomaly. We only surveyed 2 buildings at Brooksdale that year since we didn't have the capacity to do a larger study. But in the other years, it ranged from 25 nests up to 42 in 2019. And what we're trying to do is to increase the citizen science component of this work, which is encouraging landowners to monitor their own nests and to provide us with the data. So we will give people extendable mirrors and poles and data sheets, and we'll provide some training. And so far we've had 8 landowners who have been part of this project, and we're hoping to get a few more in the next year or so. It's really fun. People really enjoy being part of the project, and helps them to get to know the birds a bit and how they are a part of their ecosystem. And yeah, we've been finding that landowners generally have pretty positive attitudes towards the swallows and express the desire to help. Unfortunately, in 2019, one of our most productive sites actually burned down. It was an old ramshackle barn, no house or anything on the property, just an old barn, but it was a colony that housed anywhere from 10 to 20 active nests each year. So that resulted in the drop in nests that you can see from 2019 to 2020. So this map shows where all of the sites are located. The bigger dots have more nests, and the blue dots had 0 active nests, but did have old nests. So by far, most of our sites only have 1 to 2 nests, and a few have more. It would be great to find some sites with larger colonies to increase our sample size and be able to ask more research questions. And then this gives a sense for the timing of nest laying. Usually they will arrive in mid to late April and begin nest building or sprucing up old nests. The vertical bars show the average first laying date for each year. So it varies from May 24th to about June 4th, with a few earlier or later than that. We usually do see a few nests with eggs in the first week of May. And then second broods tend to be seen around early July. And then they'll be done nesting in late August and migrate south in early September. So we do see a slight trend toward earlier nesting over the study period, although it's really too short a study to see any effects of climate change. And those trends are probably just weather related. So this shows measures of nest success, average clutch size, average number of fledglings, and average clutch survival over time. And this is just for first broods. We don't see any statistically significant trends when we analyze this data over time, and that's partly because our sample sizes varied so much over the years. We did see that 2017 seemed to be a fairly poor year with low clutch survival and fledgling numbers. And this year also had the lowest average minimum temperatures for May, which was when most first brood chicks were in the nestling stage. So it's likely that cold snaps may have caused a significant number of nestling deaths that year. It's really hard to do detailed analysis of trends over time right now, partly because our site turnover is high. But we have definitely noticed declines in nest activity over the 6-year period. Even at Brooksdale, one of our barns had 3 to 4 active nests each year until 2019, and then it declined to 1, and then last year there was 0 nest success. They did try, they attempted to nest, but then none of the eggs hatched. So, and then another example is at the Semiahmoo Fish and Game Club. They had 2 active nests with 100% nest success for the first few years. And then by last year, there were no active nests at all. And it's just really common to hear among landowners that they used to have lots of barn swallows flying through their barns 10 to 20 years ago, and now they have none nesting at all. So we did a little bit of stats on the data since we wanted to know whether there were any variables that might predict nest success or whether a building would have any nest activity. And we predicted that nest buildings that were surrounded by more pasture would have higher nest success, especially pasture containing livestock, since lots of studies have shown that livestock benefit barn swallows by attracting insects, and in some cases even helping to keep the buildings warm. And so we looked at percent surrounding land cover within 400 meters of nest sites. And really nothing was significant in terms of land cover. Again, there's low sample size and lots of site turnover. So a longer term data set, which we're hoping this will turn into, might uncover some more relationships there. But when we just looked at the probability that a building would contain an active nest, we found that land cover did show up as significant. So we found that buildings that were surrounded by less forest and more fresh water were more likely to have active nests. And this just essentially means, so less forest means more pasture and open land, which is important for foraging. And then fresh water is important for providing aquatic emergent insects, as well as sources of mud and water, which they need for nesting. So I'm just gonna touch briefly on a second study that we did looking at swallow foraging. We wanted to find out more about the importance of open fields for swallow foraging, partly because of the rapid rate of habitat loss that's occurring in this region. We know that open fields are being rapidly lost even within the ALR, and the ecological value of these fields is high for birds and other wildlife, and yet they're not valued economically really much at all. So specifically, we wanted to find out where are swallows foraging within the Little Campbell River watershed, and what characteristics of fields are associated with swallow use. So what is it about the fields that they're using that is attractive to the swallows? And we wanted to be able to place some kind of quantitative ecological value on these fields that could very likely be lost in coming years. So we conducted swallow foraging surveys in 30 open fields throughout the watershed, which you can see as red dots on the map here. We selected the fields based on our prior knowledge of the watershed and barn swallow nesting sites, along with Google Earth imagery. And all of the fields were accessible by road. And here are some photos of what they looked like. Most of the fields were used for either hay or pasture, and they ranged in size from 1 to 12 hectares. About a quarter of them contained livestock at some point during the season. So we surveyed each field every other week from May through August in 2017 and then again in 2018. So each field was surveyed 6 times throughout the summer. The foraging survey basically just involves standing and looking at a field through binoculars for 10 minutes. We counted the maximum number of swallows by species in the field for each minute during the 10-minute survey. And this gives us a measure of rate of use, which is in bird minutes per survey. If you think about it, a field that has 2 swallows foraging consistently throughout a 10-minute period would be used more than a field that's visited by a flock of 8 swallows for only 1 minute that might just be passing through. So this was a measure that allowed us to account for consistency of use over time. And then we measured several field characteristics that we thought might influence swallow use, including field size, edge to area ratio, number of farm buildings and non-farm buildings within a 100-meter buffer surrounding each field, and then the percent of the field boundary that contained woody vegetation, sort of like a hedgerow, and then the percent of the boundary that was adjacent to another field. And pretty much all of these were measured in ArcGIS using aerial photos. And we found that barn swallows were the most common species of swallow found in the surveys. We found barn swallows in 66% of surveys and 97% of fields in 2017, and then 72% of surveys and 100% of fields, so all fields in 2018. And we found all other swallow species that are present in the region during the surveys as well. After barn swallows, violet green swallows were the next most common species. This map shows each field scaled proportionally according to barn swallow rate of use. So the larger dots are fields with greater use by barn swallows than the smaller dots. I think this one is from 2018, but we found that rate of use among fields was remarkably consistent across the 2 years. So likely the same birds are coming back to the same fields each year. These are aerial views of the 2 fields that had the highest rate of use by barn swallows. The one on the left is a hay field. It's just off of 8th Avenue. It's surrounded by a lot of farm buildings that probably house nesting colonies. And the field on the right is just off 16th Avenue. The barn that you can see in the photo, maybe there's not a, oh yeah, just here, this little building off to the right of the field. That's actually the barn that burned down that housed the largest nesting colony. And both the barn and the fields did contain livestock periodically throughout the surveys. So perhaps not surprisingly, one of the best predictors that we found of field use by barn swallows was the presence of farm buildings surrounding the fields. Fields that were surrounded by more farm buildings had higher rate of use. And this is, again, another picture of that barn that burned down. It's pretty ramshackle, but it was great for barn swallows. They loved it. So we're definitely seeing a strong link between nest sites and foraging sites. So to be a good place for foraging, a field needs to be close to a nest site. Barn swallows don't forage very far from their nesting sites. It's typically only around 400 meters or less, if possible. So they want to conserve energy. They don't want to fly farther than they have to find food. So a good foraging field isn't going to cut it if it's not close to a nest site. And a good nest site isn't a good nest site if it doesn't have a foraging field nearby. So farm buildings are also good because they tend to contain livestock or livestock manure, which attract insects. Although we didn't actually see a direct correlation between the presence of livestock and rate of use, which was a bit surprising. We had been expecting to see more of a relationship there. Fields with higher barn swallow use also tended to have fewer non-farm buildings, such as houses. So the bad news for swallows is that in this area, old farm buildings are quickly being lost and replaced by houses. So swallows are losing both their nesting sites and their foraging fields. Interestingly, violet green swallows did well in fields surrounded by lots of houses. But that's kind of a topic for another time. Somewhat surprisingly, we found that barn swallow usage was higher in smaller fields. We weren't really expecting this, but there are actually some characteristics of small fields that would be beneficial to barn swallows. Smaller fields tended to contain livestock, while larger fields tended to be hay fields without livestock. So again, horses and cows are great for swallows, not only because they attract insects to themselves and their manure, but they also stir up insects as they're walking through the grass. And another thing that's nice about small fields for swallows is that they contain more edges. And studies have found that barn swallow abundance is higher near hedgerows and field boundaries because there's more insects in those areas. So a smaller field that's bordered by a hedgerow, like this one here, might provide more food for swallows than a larger field that's just open. So what does all of this tell us? We know that the Little Campbell Watershed still contains high quality habitat for barn swallows, both for nesting and for foraging. It's still pretty rural and there's lots of small farms around with livestock and farm buildings that are great for attracting barn swallows. But these attributes aren't necessarily valued economically, especially as development pressure intensifies. So what the future holds here is pretty uncertain at best. So right now our priority is to invest in landowner engagement. We want to expand the citizen science component of our work. And we also want to test out conservation measures such as artificial nest structures and installing more hedgerows, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So I want to end by discussing some of the ways that you can help barn swallows, even if you don't have them nesting on your property. So perhaps one of the best things you can do for birds overall is to plant a biodiverse native garden with lots of pollinator-friendly plants. Some people don't realize that providing native plants for pollinators also greatly benefits birds as well. The Habitat Acquisition Trust in Victoria has done a lot of work on hedgerow planting. So even just small strips along fence lines or in unused spaces, if they're planted with native flowering plants, can be hugely beneficial for birds, including swallows. If you can do some research and plant a variety of different species that will provide the longest continual bloom time, then that would provide the greatest benefit in terms of insect abundance and diversity. We're hoping to experiment with planting hedgerows at Arasha this spring in some of our unused garden space. So maybe if you come visit Brooksdale, you'll be able to see the results of that. But really any space that you can devote to native plants, trees, shrubs, or herbs will benefit swallows. You can also install a farm pond or wetland if you have space for it. If not, you can work to protect those that already exist in your area. Recent studies have been finding that farm ponds and wetlands are actually super important for swallows. The aquatic insects that emerge over ponds and wetlands are much higher quality nutritionally for swallows than terrestrial insects, and that's due to their fatty acid content. This paper came out last year, and they found that restoring overgrown farm ponds in the UK to an open canopy state dominated by aquatic vegetation greatly increased the abundance of aquatic emergent insects, and that in turn attracted more insectivorous birds. So it's important to remember also that not all ponds are equal. The ponds that have open canopy and abundant aquatic vegetation are better for birds. So it's good to pay attention to pond quality as well as quantity and where they are in the landscape. Swallows also need sources of mud for nest building, which can be found around ponds and wetlands. And they need water, especially during the hot summer months. So if you don't have a pond or wetland and can't build one, even just providing sources of mud and water, such as a bird bath, can be beneficial to swallows. Swallows also need to be able to swoop in and out quickly and frequently to feed their nestlings, so leave doors or windows open during the breeding season if possible. This is a photo of a barn in Campbell Valley Park that has lots of old barn swallow nests. And we did some monitoring there and found that none of the nests were active. And then we convinced the park staff to cut the blackberry that is blocking the windows, which you can see here in the photo, to allow for better swallow access. And now we've been finding in more recent years that there have been 1 to 2 active nests each season. Hard to say if that's exactly what attracted the swallows back, but it certainly didn't hurt. There's not a lot known about the effectiveness of artificial nests, but anecdotal evidence shows that it can be helpful, especially for attracting swallows away from nest sites that are not suitable. You may have seen barn swallows nesting on wires or light fixtures, and that can be problematic. And putting up a wooden nest cup like the one shown here, that's sold by a birdhouse company, or even just a little wire shelf like the photo on the right, might attract swallows to those structures and away from more problematic sites. I've also seen landowners just nail a flat wooden platform to a beam, and barn swallows will use those. So it's a pretty simple way to try to attract swallows to a site. If you do put up nest cups or shelves, they should be at least 8 to 10 centimeters wide and 15 centimeters below the ceiling to allow for access. Another thing that people are trying is creating entire structures that are similar to barns to attract barn swallows. This is often done when there are old barns that need to be torn down. So Birds Canada has done some experimenting with this in Ontario. Unlike in BC, Ontario has its own provincial Endangered Species Act, and barn swallows are listed as threatened. So in Ontario, if you're going to tear down a barn swallow nesting structure, you need to do some kind of mitigation. There is some doubt as to the effectiveness of these structures, and more research needs to be done on them. But they have been successful in a few cases, such as here in Rondeau National Park, or Provincial Park, I think it is. They had a viewing tower that was becoming unsafe for people and it needed to be demolished, but it housed around 15 active barn swallow nests each year. So, so they did tear the tower down, but then they put up an artificial nest structure in its place to attract the barn swallows back. And they put up 20 wooden nest cups along the upper beams, which you can see in the photo there. And during its first season, which was in 2018, 15 of those 20 nest cups were occupied and actively used by barn swallows. So it was pretty successful. And those birds were going to come back because that was the site that they were used to nesting in. So it might be a little harder to attract swallows to a new site that they're not used to. But we are actually considering trying this out at Brooksdale as well. There's a biologist in the Columbia Valley who's going to be testing out several of these structures this summer, and we might replicate some of those designs, not this year, but hopefully next year. Yeah, like I mentioned, one of the hard things is that barn swallows rely a lot on social cues for nesting. So they will be most attracted to a site that already has some old nests in it. And they have high site fidelity, and they'll return to the same site year after year. So attracting them to a completely new site is tricky. One thing that's been suggested is harvesting old nests from sites that are being torn down and installing them in the new sites, if that's possible. And then finally, you can become a citizen scientist and monitor your barn swallow nests if you have them, and then share your observations. It's really fun to keep track of the swallows nesting on your property, and it's fairly easy if the nests are low enough to access. It's trickier if they're really high. This is a photo of Rachel. She's one of our past interns monitoring a nest in a barn. And we're continually looking for new sites for our nest monitoring program. Unfortunately, is restricted to the Little Campbell Watershed. But if you know anyone in our area who might have barn swallows, I'd love to be in touch. And you can also contribute data to Birds Canada's Project Nest Watch, which is a platform where you can submit nest data on any species, including barn swallows. So essentially, the more data that exists on swallow nesting, the better able we will be to understand their declines and hopefully try to reverse them. So with that, I'll just say thanks, and I'm happy to answer any questions. You can also email me at this address. I'd be happy to hear from you.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle. We'll now hand over to Ian if there's been any questions, or to ask the audience for any questions of Michelle.
Sure. We don't have any questions yet. We do have a comment from Mark Johnson saying that him and Gay support Arusha, and also Mark has volunteered at Brooksdale.
Actually, I have.
Oh, you have two, Gay. Okay, good.
That's great. Thank you.
Or was that? Okay.
Gay, but not Mark.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't know who wrote it, so it came from Mark Johnson. So do we have any questions out there? Actually, Brian, do you want to unmute everybody? Or are you able to do that?
Yeah, I can do that. Just hang.
Just while he's
Victoria, you're muted.
that is really embarrassing.
We, we, we saw you. We saw you.
Embarrassing. Oh, I'm going red even. It was such a darn good question. You've missed it.
We've got time. You can repeat it.
No, it's okay. Michelle, thank you. It was fantastic talk. Very interesting. Not very happy, but interesting. Yeah. You talked about how barn swallows are found all around the globe. Are there populations declining all around the globe as well? Like 87% in BC in the last 40 years is pretty bleak. Are places, I don't know.
Yeah, unfortunately, they are declining. I'm not sure what the numbers are exactly, so the declines might not be quite as dire as they seem to be in BC. But yeah, I mean, insect loss it's a global phenomenon, and so that's affecting all aerial insectivores. But yeah, most of my knowledge is North American, so I can't really speak to the specifics and their declines elsewhere.
One of the things that we have at the Beauville Slough is a lot of berry farms have come in and grown up and taken a lot of area that was oldfield habitat before. Monoculture crops, are they a problem?
I think that the swallows can use monoculture fields, and they have been shown to. I think a lot depends on the management practices, and if they're using pesticides, which I know a lot of berry farms do, then that's going to deplete the insect populations. So I think
that's particularly a challenge at the de Beauville Slough area because we have quite a population of barn swallows right next door in Minnetonka Regional Park in the horse stable, interestingly enough. And there's some evidence now that we're hearing from specialists doing hummingbird testing with DNA that the neonic levels in the hummingbirds are extremely high in that area. So we have some concerns about the insect population. One of the other things I want to note is we had a very direct example of the loss of habitat at Widgeon Marsh Regional Park this spring as a result of the demolition of all the buildings, which had quite a variety of roosts for a small population of barn swallows. And it was interesting to watch during the summer. One of our members, Ian, asked me at the time, because we also have a very strong bat population out there, and we have put out some more artificial bat boxes to replace the loss of roosts. And he asked me, do swallows and bats coexist? And at the time, I really didn't have a good answer, but I sure found out later on that summer that I've got some pictures of an actual barn swallow nest blocking one of our small bat boxes. It was put right on the bottom entrance. And when I carefully looked inside, sure enough, there was just enough room for a couple of bats to roost up above the nest for the summer. And unfortunately, the only other area that was left for the barn swallow, there was 2 pairs of barn swallows that we noted. The only other area that was noted that we found another nest was under the Metro Vancouver Regional Park's Bat Mini Condo, which was the only structure left on site right now, the artificial structure. So they merrily built a nest, and I think they had 2 broods during the summer. So as an alternative, I suggested to Metro Vancouver, rather than using our bat box, we donated 2 barn swallow nest boxes to try and put on the same post to see if they would use that instead.
That's interesting.
And anybody else with a question?
Hi there. The city of Port Moody is aware that they have barn swallows in their works yard in the large bays where the vehicles come and go. And that's something to keep an eye on. Or they have occurred. I'm not sure if they're there this year or if they were there last year, but previously, yes, barn swallows at the works yard.
Hi, Michelle. A couple things. Over the last 40 years, I've been going and spending time in Qualicum Beach at the Marshall Stevenson Wildlife Sanctuary. And the decline in many species, all species of swallows, including barn, is incredibly decreased. I mean, they used to just fill the skies, and now it's very limited. So that's kind of interesting. And also, I wondered if you'd done any education with people with houses who are screening off potential nesting sites.
Yeah, most of our education has just been with the landowners that we interact with that have swallows nesting on their properties, which we visit for our nest monitoring surveys. We would like to get into more. We'd like to do more outreach, just generally, and get to know more. More people in the watershed who have barn swallows nesting. A lot of it so far has just been word of mouth. So people that we know of will tell their neighbors, and we kind of get to know people that way. We did send around a series of letters to people in the watershed that we thought had properties that looked suitable for barn swallows, and we got a few responses from those, and then some more word of mouth spreading that way, just through neighbors talking to each other. But we would like to increase the education component of what we're doing, because a lot of people don't even realize they're threatened. And so even just educating people about their status, I think would cause a lot of people to treat them differently, think of them not as a pest, but as something to be protected. So
Thanks.
I'd like to ask about the watershed. Can you tell me streetwise where it goes? I saw a map where 16th was kind of in the middle. So what, like, does it go from 0 Avenue up to?
Yeah, well, eastward it goes out to, I think it's 148th Street in Langley, and then north to south, it actually dips down into the US in one portion. So it's around, 0 Avenue up to, I think close to just a little bit north of 16th. I don't think it goes much further north than that. The northern boundary is a little wonky. It kind of dips up and down. But,
Okay.
Yeah.
I found it interesting that the violet green increased due to the typical habitat loss of. Do you know, can you speculate why that would happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're a little bit more of an urban adapted species. They'll use nest boxes, any little holes, any little cavities they can nest in. I mean, they do need open fields for foraging, but I think their nesting requirements are a little more general. And so, yeah, it's hard to say exactly. They seem to do better around urban environments than barn swallows. So hard to say exactly why. They do better around like little patches of forest they can use for nesting. So yeah, I think they're just a little bit more general in their nesting requirements.
Okay.
Would the violet greens move with development? like as the development moves further out, because you need a field to forage in, would they move with them?
Possibly. I think as long as they do need that open space. So I mean, once that gets filled in, then they're not going to do well. But yeah, they could possibly follow developments as long as they're. I mean, they're also going to be limited by insect numbers too. So as long as the insects are declining, they're going to be losing their food sources, just like the barn swallows. They are declining as well, but not nearly as much.
I had a question regarding competition among barn swallows. If you have a large barn and you have multiple nests, are they capable of dealing with other barn swallows if there's sufficient food sources nearby? Or do they have to have a certain distance between the nests or a maximum number of nests close by? Do they compete with one another?
I've seen them lined right up. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, their nests do tend to be at least a couple feet apart. I've never seen nests like right next to each other. So they do seem to have some space limitations. Yeah.
The reason I was asking is we were once told that when it comes to tree swallows, for example, the artificial nests have to be 30 meters apart due to competition for territory. And our observations were that as long as you had sufficient food sources, that nests could be quite a bit closer, especially when you're putting up artificial structures. So I wondered if the same was for barn swallows.
Yeah, they seem to do fine in larger colonies. Most of our sites only have one to three nests, but then there was that one site that had a lot more, and as long as there's a food source available, they don't seem to mind being in close proximity.
That's what our observation is at the horse stable at Minnetonka. There's multiple nests. Just about every light bulb structure that has a little base, you've got a nest, and they've got wonderful foraging habitat nearby.
Yeah, there was a master's student who did a study in the Richmond area on barn swallow nesting, and almost all of her sites had 10 to 20 nests in one building.
Yeah.
So apparently out there, it's just much more common for them to nest in larger numbers. And it might be happening in our watershed as well. There's probably other sites that do have larger colonies that we just need to find them. It just so happens that most of the sites we know about are smaller.
Thank you.
All right, so Victoria, do you want to?
I'm too depressed.
Oh,
from being on mute?
From this story. It hasn't got a happy ending, Michelle. I don't see a happy ending, and I'm just really gutted by it. I just, I loved what the slide you showed with the some kind of Asian pottery. It looked like beautiful Asian pottery with the swallow motif, and they're just such gorgeous creatures, and it's just devastating to me that we're losing them. And it's universal, and it seems to be, it's great that there's people like you that have this rigorous approach to try to understand the various reasons why we're losing them, but it all does seem to converge on loss of insects. And you think it'd be easy to bring insects back. This is what insects do. They just explode in numbers, but we're not allowing that to happen. So it's a sad story, and you're losing your study subjects as well. This is probably the worst thank you. The worst thank you you've ever had. But we do thank you so much anyway. And there were some optimistic notes as well. The public education, I think people would be so startled by that 87% figure that they're going to not stop using their bug zappers and be more aware of allowing insects to coexist. So Anyway, thank you. Thank you so very much, Michelle. It was great to finally hear this presentation.
Thank you.
And I hope you'll stay around. We have maybe another 15 or 20 minutes where we talk about wildlife sightings and things like that. And I think you'll be interested in that. So I hope you'll stick around.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Great. So I'll hand it back to Ian to take over then, please.
Yeah, sure. So maybe we'll just take a couple of verbal wildlife sightings, and then we'll get into the photos. So is there anybody out there that wants to share a wildlife sighting?
I've had 2 salamanders outside my door.
Great.
The long-toed salamander and the Pacific Northwest salamander.
Fabulous.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
I had a chickadee start nesting yesterday,
Oh,
working away at their cavity. So they've probably been going at it for a few days now because they can almost get into it. You just see their tail sticking out of the hole when they're excavating.
Is this a tree, Jeff?
It's a dead alder. It's probably about 6 inches diameter, 10 feet tall. It's snapped off at the top and they're just nibbling away at it.
Oh, great.
On hummingbirds, I was quite excited to see that a male Anis hummingbird came and was picking fluff. I hang fluff, nesting fluff in a suet basket on my back deck. And I saw him just the other day for the first time picking the fluff out. So that was pretty exciting.
First time for me calling Farm Gardens today, saw a kingfisher.
oh, nice.
An interesting little note about the hummingbird feeders. We have 2 up, and the chickadees have taken to sipping the sugar water. And
I've seen that.
now I see there's another pair across the street taking it from the one across the street. And they're all hyper, right?
That the essence of adaptation.
Yeah. Great. Anybody else with the sighting?
Female mountain bluebird is still on the north side of Colony Farm. I think it's been there for like 3 weeks.
Wow.
But it was seen again today.
Where north side?
Along that north dike that just borders on the Poco side. You have to come in, you can park up on Shaughnessy and walk down the trail just south of IR2.
Okay.
And it's
North of
being
the
seen
pond.
Sorry?
North of the pond.
That, so the northeast
Yeah,
side.
no, way on the north dike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
North of the pond. That's what I was just saying.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, over there. Okay, thank you. Gee, that's nice to hear they're there. How wonderful.
Okay, so Brian, maybe we can share your screen and show some submitted photos.
Fabulous, fabulous. Some great photos and a contest winner. Stanley.
Oh, yes.
We did see a bee today. Couldn't get a picture of it.
Has to be a bumblebee.
Oh, it was.
Oh, okay.
But no luck.
We already have a winner.
Wow, we got an intro slide. This is classy.
We don't do things by halves here.
No, we don't. Wow.
Clearly.
I've always lived by the motto, if something's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. Okay, so.
Oh, we should have a drum roll.
Drum roll.
Yes.
Our first bumblebee sighting winner is Susan Lundell.
Woo!
Yay!
Well done, well done. Yippee!
Well, I had
I had seen this I have a very sheltered courtyard, and I saw it first of all in this left-hand side picture, and it was moving around in a very sunny spot. So I got my good camera out and I got a couple of photos, and then I just kind of forgot about it. And then later I saw it had moved and it was just sitting absolutely still. So I took that first photo I just had my phone with me at that time. And then almost immediately I got the email from Victoria about the contest. So I just fired it right off immediately.
Good timing.
You can see in the right-hand photo, the stinger.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
It has two names, a black-tailed bumblebee or a orange-rumped bumblebee, same thing. I forget the scientific name.
Fabulous, fabulous photos.
Melanopygus.
Okay. Oh.
Go
However,
off.
it's not.
Yeah.
After it just kind of came to a standstill on the sidewalk, it stopped moving, and I was really quite concerned about it. So I moved it into a safe spot. I didn't want somebody to walk on it. And then Victoria and Nora both suggested I give it some sugar water. So I put a little wet paper towel by it, and it was lying on its side yesterday morning.
Oh.
And then it turned upright, and that's all it's done. So, but it looks good. I mean, it doesn't look like it's drying up or anything. So I think it's just in some state of torpor. But if anybody can help me, what to do about it, or knows more about, why it would be moving around and then just stop or whatever.
Sid Cannings.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, fabulous. So congratulations, Susan. Of course, your huge prize is the bragging rights. So now you've had your 15 seconds of fame.
Wow. On to the next person.
Yeah. But sincere congratulations. That's awesome. Great photos. Thank you. Okay, Darlene, up and front and center, please.
This raft of Barrow's goldeneye was just off Stanley Park seawall. And we also saw huge rafts by Gambier Island a few times this winter. And I noticed in Sid Canning's book, A Natural History, that 60 to 90% of the world's population of this duck lives in British Columbia, breeding on interior lakes and wintering on protected coastal inlets. So these were diving constantly. There was lots of action, and they were feeding on the mussels and shellfish in the area. It's quite cool to see them under the water.
Yeah, they dive really well.
Oh, wow.
Fabulous. We'll have another run of the video. Okay. Thank you, darling.
Very nice.
Kathy Lico, front and center.
Oh, yes. Well, if you've ever been to the eye clinic for someone who's getting their cataract surgery or eye bulb worked on, you'll know that you spend a lot of time parked there. And so I was there, and what a racket. I couldn't figure out where the sound was coming from. Well, the top of the building. And this Canada goose was serenading two others on the next building over, and somebody was walking their dog, and then the song changed. So I was quite impressed with the little show I got while waiting outside the eye clinic. So sometimes the action is not on the ground, but on the roof.
Oh, that's funny.
That is awesome. Awesome. Thank you for quickly capturing that. That's awesome.
Yes. Well, and I hats off to Susan for sugar water on a paper towel for the bee. Like, that's a very caring act. The way to go, Susan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hope it works.
Okay, John Saremba, front and center.
We have a sad, lonely goose at Blakeburn Lagoons. And every once in a while, every time we walk by, it's there by itself. And when the other geese fly overhead, it's such a plainful, mournful call, the little goose. And on this day, it got so tired of having to share what little open water there was with those damn northern shovelers, and those widgeons can be, you know how they can be. So it decided, the hell with you. I'm just going to walk away.
Oh dear.
So if you happen to see a smallish Canada goose with a sort of a gray spot on the side of its head, please say hello. Give it a little bit of cheer.
A nice Poco welcome. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. John.
What initially caught my attention, this is near just off Fremont at the entrance to Blakeburn Lagoons, the Fremont entrance, was the deer. And Lee Harding pointed out, he zoomed in and there's two little knobs on top of the deer. So it's a young male just starting to sprout its horns. And in looking through the camera, I realized in the background were the sandhill cranes, gracefully foraging away, and they're common visitors to this area. So we're hoping that they don't end up going over to the nearby Carnoustie golf course. As you know, that sandhill cranes and golf courses don't mix. We hope they can stay in this farm field and remain healthy.
Yeah. Fabulous photo. I love the colors and just gorgeous.
Thank you.
And again, John.
Oh, nice.
Yes, I often wonder why they call them golden crown sparrows, and it didn't take me long to figure this one out. But they've been around quite a bit, and I have a tough time sometimes with sparrow identification, especially when we have to listen for their sounds. But a delightful little bird. Always love to see them. They're so colorful. And this was the same day that I took the picture of the, almost the same day as the Canada goose. And you can see how fluffed up this sparrow is, trying to keep warm.
Beautiful.
And finally, the thing that caught my eye was not just the great blue heron, but look at those feet. My gosh, it's like swamp waders.
Awesome.
And then finally, we have a resident red-tailed hawk that keeps a close eye on all the waterfowl. And once again, if you look at those talons, you can see why when it hits a bird, there's not much chance of that bird surviving.
Well equipped.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then finally, it's someone started putting up a feeder at Blakeburn Lagoons, and the red-winged blackbird pair. It's not often you see them together, but they've come back and they're quite vocal at this time of the year. And this is one of the males with one of his harem, I assume. And it was interesting. I was reading the other day, if I could digress, they've done a study, and the amulet, the size of the amulet, the brighter red and the larger, the more virile the females think he is, and they have a larger harem. And they took one poor bird and covered up the amulets, and the females wouldn't have anything to do with them.
Wow. And again.
And then we have our resident Cooper's hawk, which I was very fortunate. It's quite often hiding in the trees, but this one day the sun was just shining on it beautifully. And they're just so agile. They fly through the townhouse complex laneways, and it's just such a magnificent little bird.
I think this is the last one, John.
Yeah, this is the last one. It was interesting behavior. I couldn't figure out what it was doing at first. And then I looked it up and watched it for a while. And what it does to preen its feathers, it can't reach down far enough. So it actually spreads its feathers really wide, and it starts this little grooming behavior to be able to reach down and get the in between the feathers, which it did later on.
Fabulous.
Very good.
Well, thank you all for the photo submitters. They're truly fabulous photos, and I'm really actually I think this forum is really good for having our wildlife sightings. Just the visual aspect adds a totally new dimension to it. So for the rest of the team, if you have any wildlife sightings, be it in any time in the next month or even in the last month or two, if you got some fabulous photos, just send them through to us, and I'll capture them, and and you may make an appearance on the next slideshow at the next meeting. So I'd like a cutoff of 2 days, but there are times when I can do it more quickly than that. So all good. So thank you, everybody. And I'll hand back to Ian.
Me. Yes. So we'll just see if anybody that brought up any wildlife sightings from anybody. I know for myself, talking about the golden eyes, I saw golden eyes off of Barnett Marine Park, and there were quite a few there as well. But I'm not sure if they were common or barrows.
I just had one more to add. As some of you know, we've been doing a little informal colony bird count, colony farm bird count, and there's a small group of us, and we're always looking for more volunteers that go out on Monday and Thursday morning. And today we got a clear example of the value of the old field habitat. As we were walking along to one of our sites, we had the opportunity, I believe it was a pair of, was it Harris hawks that we saw, Victoria?
Northern Harriers.
Harrier, yes, Northern Harriers. And we saw one foraging, flying over marvelously right along the current TMX temporary workspace, which is now being fenced off, foraging in the home field. And then we turned around and happened to see what we thought was the male foraging on the Wilson side of the home field. It was just so delightful to see these magnificent birds foraging in these open spaces. It's simply a delight. And you too could observe the same thing if you happen to join our little team of intrepid bird counters.
I'll just add to your story there, John, that, well, there's a couple of things to add, of course. Yeah. You can't just say one thing. We had a really close view of one of the harriers. First of all, it was just this shadow that went over and darkened the sky. It was that close to us at one point, and it was just flying in front of us. So it was absolutely magical to see that. The bird survey that we're doing at Colony Farm, John, you said we aim for Monday and Thursday, I think you said. But yes, it's very weather dependent. We don't do the survey if it's rainy or if it's windy. So in fact, the days of the week change considerably. We've started doing it starting at 8 a.m. There's 7 stations. We count for 5 minutes at each station. And the whole count takes about an hour and a half. So if you're interested in joining us some morning, especially if you're a good birder, we could really, really use you. Larry, if you're ever there at 8 o'clock, that would be fantastic. I'm sure we could pick up a lot from you, but everybody else is welcome too. Part of what we're hoping to do is that we're all going to become better birders in the process of this, birding by ear. There's going to be other benefits. I've got a very, what I think is a nice Excel spreadsheet. So Darlene's brushing up her Excel skills. So there's lots of things that people can contribute in different ways, and we're all learning from each other. So it's I've certainly enjoyed it so far. I think we've done it about 4 times now. So just get in touch send mail to burkemountaingnats@gmail.com or get in touch with me if you want to join us some morning.
Did see, yeah, go ahead, Victoria.
No, it's okay.
And a couple of other highlights today. We saw the pair of ringneck pheasants out in the field by the wetland, as well as the first 2 tree swallows that were reported. at Colony Farm. We saw those as well.
Yeah, John got a really good photo of the ringneck pheasant pair.
Stay tuned for next month's
Yeah,
wildlife.
classic.
right.
Yeah, yeah. If you can wait that long. Yes. So I think we'll end it there.
Sure. I'll just
okay.
make an announcement.
Oh,
if
yes.
that's
I'm
okay.
sorry, Ian. Yes.
That's okay. So just to advertise the show and share Zoom meeting that we have this month, it will be March 24th from 7 to 8 p.m. and we start allowing people in at 6:45. And this month will be Ron Long, and he'll be photographing birds from my kitchen during COVID. So he's a fabulous photographer. And as you might have already seen the picture of the pileated woodpecker. So I think it's going to be a great show and share this month. So please come out.
And if I can just add to that, last month's show and share with Jeff giving his life on the Coquitlam River was just fabulous. I've checked our YouTube channel, and there's been 117 viewings of the recording.
Wow.
Of that presentation. Jeff, you're a superstar now. I encourage you, if you haven't looked at it, it is just fabulous. Jeff, your powers of observation astound me, and just I'm in awe of the stuff that you notice and see. So please, if you haven't watched it, go to our YouTube channel and have a look at Jeff's presentation, as well as the other ones we have too.
And I believe Jeff said he had 10,000 photos, so I'm sure that we could have him back to show some more as well. So
yeah, he may be back for non-court. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also just touching on the show and share is that please contact me if you've got an idea for a presentation.
And I should also add that I had the pleasure of watching the Mossam Creek Wildlife. I think was that last week, Ruth?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I was totally enchanted. There were some fantastic photos taken on their camera of bobcats and cougars moving through the site. I just loved it.
Yeah.
It was excellent.
Fabulous video, just amazing. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Ruth. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll hand it over to Victoria.
Okay. Well, I think we're getting pretty darn good at this Zoom business.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's opened up so many more opportunities. I know we're not seeing each other in person, but there's a lot of good that's coming out of it. I think sharing our photos this way is a marvelous sideways step, maybe not a step forward, but a sideways step. So thank you all very much for coming out tonight. Thank you again, Michelle, for drawing everybody out. It was great to have you here. And we'll see you on the 24th at the show and share, and then at our next monthly meeting when we have Professor John Clegg with a fascinating story on how the Fraser Canyon was formed and the Fraser Delta.
Oh, wow.
Really good story. So we'll...
the date of the next meeting?
It's Tuesday, April something.
Yeah, it's a Tuesday rather than...
Yeah, just we have to
It's a
mention
Tuesday.
It's a Tuesday, yeah.
Yeah. We go, we're not fixed Tuesday or Thursday. It just depends on the availability of the speaker. So Michelle, it was easier for you to come Thursday, and next month's speaker, it's easier for him to come on a Tuesday. So
April 13th, mark your calendars.
yeah, great. Thank you all very much. Enjoy what's left of the evening and get out there and enjoy the spring.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Beautiful weather.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Yay.
Good night.
Good night.
Great speaker.